Okay, guys. So I think on Friday, perhaps I didn't do a very good job of explaining this topic. So I'm going to make this video to hopefully clear things up. So on this side, we've got defining relative clauses and then non-defining relative clauses. Now, before we begin, why don't we stop and think about the meaning of those terms, right? So we've got defining, que define, and non-defining, que no define. Okay, so here are some other key differences. With defining relative clause, we don't use commas. The information we have is necessary, and we have the option of using that. In non-defining relative clauses, like the ones that don't define, don't tell you exactly which one we're talking about, we can't use that. The information given is extra, additional, and we have at least one comma. Usually two, but at least one. Okay, good. Let's move on. So let's have a look at this one. Mi coche, que es negro, es lento. Now, that is an example of a non-defining relative clause because we've got one car, and it's not defining which car we're talking about. However, if we contrast this and say, mi coche que es negro es lento, that means that I have other cars that are of different colors and it's defining that we're talking about this one. This one, you're not part of it. This one, you're not part of it because you're red, because you're blue. So, mi coche que es negro es lento. That's a defining relative clause because it defines which one of the three we're talking about. We're talking specifically about the black one. Okay? Right, good. One more example. Mi hermana, que vive en España, habla español. Yeah? We've got just one sister here. Y esa misma es la que habla español. However, mi hermana que vive en España habla español. We've got one that lives in Spain. We've got one that lives in Spain, one that lives in Germany, and one that lives in France. Well, we're not talking about you. We're not talking about you. We're talking specifically about you. So that's a defining relative clause. It defined which person we were talking about. So let's see how this works in English. All right. So here we could say, my car, which is red, or which is black, sorry, is slow. Now, here, our only option is which. All right. However, here, mi coche que es negro es lento, we could use which, or we could use that. I could say, my car which is black is slow, or my car that is black is slow. Because we're talking about, it's a defining relative clause. Okay, so here we've got both options. Here, the only option we have is which. So I would prefer you use which in both cases because which is, the option that can work in both. So it's kind of like the safe one to go for. Okay. In this case, mi hermana que vive en España. So here in the non-defining relative clause, this one is the non-defining relative clause. Our only option is who. I can't say, my sister that lives in Spain speaks Spanish. I can only say, my sister who lives in Spain. However, in the defining relative clause, I've got two options. I could say that, or I could say which, or who, sorry. So again, guys, who is definitely the safe option because if you notice, it's available for both. That is only available for defining relative clauses, not available for non-defining relative clauses. So I would say don't take the risk and just use who for people and which for things and just forget about that because in any case, it doesn't sound quite so nice. So how do we know if we're dealing with a defining or a non-defining relative clause? Well, there's an easy test we can do in Spanish. We can try to use the word mismo or misma, or mismas, blah, blah, blah. So, for example, if I said, mi hermana, misma que vive en España, habla español, that would be a non-defining relative clause. If you can use misma, or mismo, or mismos, blah, blah, we're talking about a non-defining relative clause. If that's not available, for example, mi coche mismo que es negro, and you're talking about many different cars and you want to specify which car you're talking about, if mismo or misma or blah, blah is not available, then you're not dealing with a non-defining relative clause. Okay, the second test. If you can use el que or la que, mi hermana, la que vive en España, o sea, de las hermanas que tengo, la que vive en España, o sea, estoy definiendo de qué hermana estoy hablando. If you can use el que or la que, you're not dealing with a non-defining relative clause. You're actually dealing with a defining relative clause. Okay, so that's just a quick test to know if you're dealing with a non-defining or defining relative clause in Spanish. Okay, all right. Now, what's the situation in English? Well, here we've got which, that, and who. Now, you can use which to talk about things. And you can use which for both, for defining relative clauses and non-defining relative clauses, yeah? It's like the master key, you know? It's going to be okay in all cases, all right? This second case, that can be used for things or people, but only if you're dealing with defining relative clauses. You can't use the word that in a non-defining relative clause. So for that reason, I don't recommend you use it because it doesn't sound as good. Doesn't sound quite so sophisticated, and it's only it can only be used in defining relative clauses, whereas these guys, who and which, you know, using who for people, can be used in defining and non-defining relative clauses. So these ones that can be used for both are definitely the safer option. Okay, so let's do a few exercises on this. David, comma, is my friend, speaks French. Well, our only option there would be who. These commas are telling me that this information is extra. And because we're dealing with extra information, I know that I'm dealing with a non-defining relative clause. If I'm dealing with a non-defining relative clause, and I'm talking about a person, my only option is who. You couldn't put that in this gap, okay? National Geographic, comma, is a big company, writes English books, all right? So this would have to be which because, you know, again, we're dealing with a non-defining relative clause. So we can't use that in this case. My car that is red is slow. Now, again, we've got this case where it's that because we're talking about a thing, right? My car. But I know for a fact this is a defining relative clause because we're able to use that. But in any case, I would just prefer you use which because, as I said before, which is going to work for a defining or a non-defining relative clause. The man that helped me is tall. Now, the man is obviously a person. Now, I could also say who. And in fact, I would prefer you to say who because in this case, we've got a defining relative clause. Yeah? Estamos definiendo específicamente de qué hombre estamos hablando, right? So, the man who helped me. But I would prefer you to use who and I prefer you to use which because you can use who and you can use which with confidence. Because you don't have to worry about it being a defining or non-defining relative clause because you can use it everywhere. Okay? Right. Next stage. When can I omit the relativizer? So, relativizer is this thing, you know, this thing, and this thing. Okay? So, I need a car that or which goes first, which goes fast. Now, both are okay. I mean, you could say I need a car which or I need a car that goes fast. The question is, can you delete the relativizer? Could I say I need a car that I need a car goes fast? And the answer in this case is no. You have to include it. Why? Because immediately after we don't have a noun or a pronoun. Now contrast it to this case where we do have a noun or a pronoun immediately after. She needs a partner who or that she loves. Yeah. In that case, you could say she needs a partner she loves. That would be perfect. But I would recommend you don't do this. I would recommend you don't omit the relativizer because you're just kind of asking for problems. Because in the first case, it's less similar to Spanish. In Spanish, we cannot omit the relativizer. You can't say, ella necesita a una pareja, ella ama. No, it's que ella ame, no? For example. You can't omit the relativizer. So if you want your English to be more similar to Spanish, please don't omit the relativizer. Secondly, relativizers can only be omitted if you're dealing with defining relative clauses. You cannot omit the relativizer if you're dealing with a non-defining relative clause. So again, guys, the safe option is just don't bother omitting the relativizer. There's no need. It's not necessary. And if you do omit the relativizer, you run the risk of omitting the relativizer when that option wasn't actually available. Okay. Next one. I'm looking for a dog which or that doesn't bark. In that case, the relativizer is completely necessary. You couldn't say, I'm looking for a dog doesn't bark. You must include which or that. Okay. In any case, I prefer you to include which, and I've explained why. Mike wants a house that or which he doesn't need to clean. In this case, you could omit the relativizer because you've got this pronoun directly afterwards. Yeah, so you could say Mike wants a house he doesn't need to clean. But again, guys, I wouldn't recommend it because this option of omitting relativizers has two big disadvantages. By omitting it, you make it less similar to Spanish. Yeah. And secondly, you can only do it in direct relative clauses. But you never need to omit the relativizer. It's never like a requirement. So why bother taking the risk? Just include it. If you include it, it's always going to be correct. If you omit it, you run the risk of making a mistake. And not only that, it's less similar to Spanish. Okay? I hope this helps.